Up for grabs this November is a rare open Minnesota congressional seat. The 3rd Congressional District is made up of the suburbs west of Minneapolis. That includes wealthier areas like Edina, Eden Prairie, Plymouth, and Maple Grove, middle-income communities like Bloomington, and working-class neighborhoods like those in Coon Rapids and the city of Anoka. Once reliably Republican, the 3rd has transitioned to a swing district, swinging in recent elections to Democrats.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. The 3rd Congressional District is currently represented by Democrat Dean Phillips, who decided not to run for re-election after mounting a lonely and unsuccessful run for the Democratic presidential nomination against President Joe Biden. The 3rd District Democratic candidate is Dr. Kelly Morrison, a longtime Twin Cities OB-GYN, former state representative and senator. The Republican candidate is Tadd Jude, a former state representative and senator, a former Hennepin County commissioner and district court judge. Until Phillips won in 2018, the district had been for decades a Republican seat. One of this race's defining issues is abortion rights, pitting Morrison and her OB-GYN experience against Jude, an abortion rights opponent. Let's start tonight with Republican Tadd Jude. Well, joining us right now is Tadd Jude, the Republican candidate for the 3rd Congressional District. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Esme.
Okay. You have a huge background in Minnesota politics, also in Hennepin County politics. You were actually at one point the youngest person ever elected to the Minnesota House of Representatives, a record that, does that still stand?
As far as I know.
Okay. And that was in 1972. You were only 20 years old when you were elected to the Minnesota House.
Right.
Okay. And then you also went on to serve, you were in the House and Senate for about 20 years, right, until 1993.
Yes, I was in the legislature in the House for 10 years. In fact, when I was first elected, it was nonpartisan. So, you know, there weren't Democrat and Republican items on the ballot. You just ran as a nonpartisan candidate in 1972. And,
you know, I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Maybe we should go back there.
And you know, it seemed like obviously in the legislature you were able to reach nonpartisan and bipartisan agreements a lot easier if you didn't run as a Democrat or a Republican.
Well, I was not aware of that. That's really, really fascinating. You also have been a Hennepin County commissioner, and you've been a judge as well, a district court judge.
Right.
What do you think all of those experiences combined, I mean, that's a pretty big resume, brings to your background that you'll be able to use if you are elected to Congress?
Well, one of the things I've always prided myself on doing is just trying to solve problems that people have and do so in a way that isn't ideologically oriented as much as just trying to solve the problem and giving a good path forward that everybody can be the best they can be and take advantage of the economic opportunities that people have. One of the advantages I think I've got is I've gone door knocking a lot. I've gone to a lot of doors and visited with a lot of people. They've gotten to know me and I've gotten to know them. And I think we're able to come up with some pretty good solutions to problems that confront the community. For example, Hennepin County had targeted Western Hennepin County for a number of landfills. You know, they wanted to turn, like at one time, I think it was like a dozen farms into landfills. And it just would have been a disaster for air quality and for water quality and land contamination. So we came up with good programs for reducing waste and recycling and composting and waste to energy. We had many different programs to try to, and it ended up we didn't need any of those landfills.
Right, and this was when you were a Hennepin County
and that's the kind of problem solving I'd like to move forward.
Was that when you were a commissioner?
Pardon me?
Was that when you were a commissioner?
When I was in the legislature and the county commissioner, both.
Okay.
And I mean, obviously in the courtroom, you hear cases where you see the best and the worst of everybody, I think, coming
Right.
into the courtroom. But you make a decision based on the law, based on the facts, and on the Constitution, and you move forward. And we hear every argument that can be made legitimately in the courtroom, and oftentimes you have a jury, and the jury decides the facts. You apply the law to the facts, and then you
Right.
come up with a good way forward.
Let me ask you about abortion. I know that you consider yourself pro-life, anti-abortion rights. Where do you stand exactly on abortion, which obviously is a huge issue in all districts across the country?
Well, I think every abortion is certainly a tragedy, and I support the Dobbs decision because it returned to the states the ability to every state can legislate and come to their own conclusions. And in Minnesota, there really is no dispute that we have abortion rights in Minnesota because both the courts and the legislature, and of course in Minnesota law, have authorized wide open abortion. Now, I don't agree with late term abortion. I don't agree with withdrawing medical care from babies that are born alive. And anything
Well,
I've
and
worked
I
on
don't, that's
in,
something, I mean, people, you know, I, I'm not sure that that is accurate to say that medical care is withheld in Minnesota. I know that former President Trump has said that, but I have not seen any evidence that medical care is withheld or that babies, in Mr. Trump's view, says that they're executed here in Minnesota after they're born alive. I'm not sure that's true at all. I don't think it's true.
well, I think you're misstating the facts in terms of what Minnesota law changed during the last couple of years, where there was a requirement of medical care basically to do no harm. And that requirement was repealed by the legislature. So that's a misstatement that you made. And but in any case, I believe that medicine should be there to do no harm, and that should be the objective of medical care. I do not support a federal ban on abortion. It's up to the states. I support it being a state issue. In fact, I think there are like 10 states that are voting on it this year.
All right. Well, listen, Tadd Jude, we will continue to follow this race closely. Obviously, it's an open house seat, which is very rare. We appreciate your time so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, Kelly Morrison. Joining us right now is former Senator Kelly Morrison, who is still a doctor and has been for years a gynecologist in the Twin Cities. Thank you so much. You're obviously the nominee for the 3rd Congressional District from the Democratic Party. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Esme.
All right, you would be the first or the only gynecologist, pro-choice gynecologist, serving in the U.S. House if in fact you do win. How does your perspective as somebody who has delivered babies, who's cared for pregnant women for years, affect not only your view of just the issue itself, but also the larger issue of what is happening right now in Minnesota and also across the country?
Well, you're right, Esme. My career has been as a doctor, not a politician, and I've had the honor and privilege of taking care of Minnesotans for more than 20 years. And so I know firsthand how important it is that women be able to make their own reproductive health care decisions without interference from the government. And so when I got to the legislature, I sponsored legislation to protect reproductive rights here in Minnesota. And then, when Trump was elected president, we knew what that meant for the Supreme Court. He ran on appointing justices to the court for the sole purpose of overturning Roe versus Wade. And that's what he did, and that's what happened. So in the wake of that Dobbs decision that did overturn Roe versus Wade, we got ready here in the Minnesota legislature. I formed with my colleagues the Reproductive Freedom Caucus. We wrote legislation. So we were ready when we won pro-choice majorities in the House and Senate to get busy. And as the only OB-GYN in the legislature, I was proud to help lead the effort to protect and expand access to reproductive health care here in Minnesota. Now, we're lucky that we have those protections here, but as you know, there have been severe bans and restrictions that have been passed in state legislatures across the country after that decision. And that impacts us here in Minnesota as well. We've seen a huge surge of people coming from out of state to get the care that they need. So if you were right, if I do win, I'd be the only pro-choice OB-GYN in Congress. And with my legislative experience here, I'm ready to take both my medical and my legislative experience to Washington to help lead the effort to protect access to reproductive health care for all Americans. We've seen a maternal health crisis unfold across the country in the wake of that Dobbs decision. And I think that people are beginning to understand the nuance of reproductive health care and how you just cannot legislate these exceptions. For example, for the life of the mother is a popular one in some states. There's a lot of nuance, and we need people to understand that those decisions have to be made in that moment using the clinical scenario, medical experience, the desires of the patient. There's so much nuance. And as has been discussed before, pregnant women can withstand a lot of insult. They can withstand a lot of blood loss up until the moment that they can't, and then they can decline very precipitously. So defining at what point someone's life is in danger is not something that can be legislated.
And we should go back and say, you were a state senator, you resigned recently, so actually your state Senate seat, that's a whole nother story, that the race for that, because that's a big deal. And I will be doing a story on that one as well as a show on that one. But before that, you were state representative. What year were you elected as state representative?
I was elected in 2018.
Okay, and then you ran for the state Senate.
That's right.
Let me ask you, the third district for many, many years before Dean Phillips flipped it was a Republican held district by Jim Ramstad. Granted, he was a moderate Republican, which I'm not sure that exists anymore, but it was a Republican district. So you've got a lot of Republicans out there. What are you hearing from constituents? What have you been hearing for the years that you've been an advocate and a lawmaker on this reproductive rights issue from constituents, both Republicans and Democrats in the 3rd Congressional District?
Well, you're right. We have a proud tradition in the 3rd District of having really excellent representation. Bill Frenzel, Jim Ramstad, Dean Phillips, all were, regardless of their party, represented everyone in the 3rd District and worked hard to reach across the aisle. I hope to continue that tradition if I have the honor of serving. But I will tell you, I think we've learned again in the wake of the Dobbs decision that reproductive health care is not really a partisan issue when you get down to individual people. It's an issue of personal freedom and autonomy. It's an issue of health. It's an issue of economic and racial justice. It's an issue that impacts everyone. Every woman who is able to get pregnant understands that there is nuance in this issue. And that it really doesn't belong. We don't need people who are sitting in the state legislature, entering our hospital rooms and exam rooms. Those decisions need to be made by patients and their healthcare team. And Democrats and Republicans and independents understand that. We've seen ballot initiatives across the country in red states and blue states and purple states. Americans are pretty clear that they want personal autonomy and freedom and health.
Yeah. And you mentioned the nuance of this issue. Some of the misinformation that's out there is not that nuanced. I was at a Trump event in Western Wisconsin, and the former president said, as a fact, that babies are executed in Minnesota after they are born, which obviously is not true. Do you worry about the misinformation that's out there?
I think it's important that we have calm, factual conversations about reproductive health care. And you're absolutely right. There has been bad information pushed for many decades around the issue of reproductive health care. And unfortunately, former President Trump is fanning those flames and continuing to put out inaccurate information. Of course, that's not happening in Minnesota. And I think it's important to remember that 90% of terminations of pregnancy occur very early in pregnancy. And the rare ones that happen later, overwhelmingly, something really tragic has happened either to the pregnancy or to the patient. And so this demonization of those patients and their families is really cruel to me. You know, I've seen people go through the absolute worst day of their lives, and my heart breaks when I hear people mocking them for difficult decisions that they had to make.
And I don't mean to, you are certainly not a one-issue candidate, so I realize I've taken a lot of time on this issue of reproductive rights, but what are some of your other priorities if in fact you are elected to serve in Congress?
Well, you know, I've also, of course, as a physician, seen my patients struggle to afford the medicine they need. This is an American challenge. And so when I was in the legislature, I worked really hard to take on big pharma and dig into how can we lower the cost of prescription drugs here in Minnesota. I passed the Drug Price Transparency Act with a Republican in the Senate when we had a divided legislature. Again, this is not a partisan issue. All Minnesotans struggle with this. And then we were able to pass more legislation, the Prescription Drug Affordability Board that will help Minnesotans to afford the medicines they need. So, you know, the Biden administration getting that list and Democrats getting that list of 10 drugs that Medicare can now negotiate past is a big deal for individuals and for saving money for our healthcare system. I would love to see that list expanded. There's a lot of work that can be done on the federal level, so I'd love to dig into that. And Esme, you know, my husband is a former Army Ranger and a combat veteran. He comes from a long tradition of military service, and I have family members who also serve. So veterans issues are near and dear to my heart. So I would be very interested in being involved in making sure that our veterans have access to the healthcare and the services that they deserve. You know, they served us, they served our country, so they served all of us by extension. But I'm inspired again and again by the ethic of service in that community. They also serve each other. When one of theirs is in need, they step up for each other. And I think we could use more of that ethic of service and helping each other out among our leaders and in our government.
Well, Dr. Kelly Morrison, thank you so much for your time, and we obviously will be following this race very closely.
Thank you so much, Esme.
Coming up, analysis from Humphrey School professor Larry Jacobs. He'll take a look at the impact of Morrison's huge cash advantage. She's raised $1.3 million compared to Tadd Jude's $162,000. Joining us right now, Professor Larry Jacobs of the Humphrey School. Thank you so much for coming on.
Good to be with you.
All right, let's talk about the 3rd Congressional District, which is the district that was held by Congressman Dean Phillips, who decided not to run again in the aftermath of his presidential run. This is a district that, so for many years, decades was held by Republicans. Dean Phillips flipped it. Your thoughts about the race this year?
Well, I think it's a very interesting race. You have two high-quality candidates. The Republican, Tadd Jude, former judge, former member of the House. You know, those are two terrific qualifications. And then you've got Kelly Morrison, who's been kind of a star at the legislature, first in the House and then in the Senate, where she recently stepped down. And her career has been as a doctor, delivering babies. So, you know, two terrific candidates, and they're going to battle.
Right. Let me ask you about the fundraising differences, because I was struck by that. There is an extraordinary difference in the fundraising. Kelly Morrison has well over $1 million that she's raised. Tadd Jude has raised much less than that, and the cash on hand is similarly out of whack. I mean, that's a huge advantage for Kelly Morrison.
It's a tremendous advantage. It allows Kelly Morrison to get ads out, allows her also to build out a staff of people who are organizing or at the doorstep with the literature, and also putting together, you know, variety of different online social media. And Tadd Jude just doesn't have that. He's fighting with his arm behind his back. He doesn't have a resourced party behind him, as does Kelly Morrison. It's a tremendous disadvantage going through the race. And I should add, it reflects the judgment of donors in Minnesota and around the country about this district and the advantage that Kelly Morrison has in it.
All right. Well, let's talk about the district, because for so many decades it was held by Congressman Ramstad, who was, everybody described him as a moderate or even liberal Republican. I'm not even sure that the liberal Republican term even it exists anymore. But where are people in this district? What is it seen as in terms of where people are?
It's a western set of suburbs mostly, and the district has clearly been on a Democratic lean over the last couple decades. Eric Paulson, who was a conservative Republican, had it for also a number of years. He was defeated soundly in 2018 by Dean Phillips by double digits, and Dean Phillips has been winning by double digits. We've also seen state house members the DFL winning in that area. So I would say that the 3rd Congressional District has certainly moved in a Democrat's direction, and that favors Kelly Morrison.
In terms of the abortion issue, it seems like this is one of the central issues in this race. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and it's a little peculiar because this is a district that's moderated, and Kelly Morrison's support for protecting the right to abortion is not unpopular among the general electorate. Tadd Jude had a run on it to win the Republican nomination, but now he's looking at a much broader, more moderate electorate, and I don't think that issue is going to help him at all.
One of the things that's interesting when you talk to Dr. she is a doctor, a gynecologist. I mean, when you talk about this issue and she starts talking about the life of the mother, she'll mention things like how the blood flow can go down dramatically, and a non-life-threatening situation can so quickly turn to a life-threatening situation, something that only a doctor who's delivered babies would know. And it certainly makes you take note. Is that something that voters are going to notice as well?
I think so. I think Kelly Morrison just brings so much credibility on the issue of abortion, given her medical background, her experience delivering babies. This is not a theoretical or abstract discussion. It's a very tangible discussion for Kelly Morrison. And I think Tadd Jude is just in a difficult spot in trying to make it political. I think for a lot of voters, particularly voters who may not be, Democrat or Republican in a strong way, they're looking at the candidate and sizing them up. And Kelly Morrison's experience as a gynecologist who has delivered many babies just gives her an edge.
All right. Well, listen, Professor Larry Jacobs, thank you so much. We really appreciate your insights.
Good to be with you.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please email me with comments and suggestions at esme@cbs.com. The show streams on CBS News Minnesota every Wednesday and Thursday at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. On Friday, the show posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.